One of the instincts that shows up early in entrepreneurship is the instinct to build everything yourself. At the beginning, that instinct makes perfect sense. The business is fragile. Resources are limited. If something needs to exist inside the system, the most obvious path is to create it from scratch. New offers get built. Processes get built. Marketing systems get built. Even entire products get built. For a long time, building is the only tool available. But eventually, something changes inside a business that survives long enough. The system begins producing not just income, but capital. And once capital enters the picture, a new strategic option appears that didn't exist before: acquisition. The moment a business has capital, building stops being the only way to grow. That shift doesn't happen overnight. Most founders spend years training their instincts around building. When a new opportunity appears, the first question is usually how to create it. How do we launch this? How do we design it? How do we build the capability ourselves? Those questions are useful early in the journey. Building forces founders to understand the mechanics of their own system. It teaches them how value is created inside the business. But building has a cost that becomes more visible as the business matures: time. I remember realizing this during a period when the business had reached a stable level of income and the system had begun accumulating some surplus capital. Opportunities were appearing faster than before. New ideas, new channels, new possibilities. Earlier in the journey, every one of those opportunities would have triggered the same response: let's build it. But suddenly, that response felt different. Because building something new meant months of work, experimentation, and uncertainty. The machine would have to divert time and attention away from the systems already producing income. That's when the alternative became clearer. Instead of building the capability, what if the capability already existed somewhere else? Acquisition is the act of buying time that someone else already spent building something valuable. That realization is one of the biggest strategic shifts founders experience when capital becomes available. Building converts time into assets. Acquiring converts capital into time. And depending on the situation, one of those resources is often far more valuable than the other. I started noticing that many of the most durable businesses weren't built entirely from scratch. They were assembled. Pieces were built internally when the system needed deep understanding or tight integration. But other pieces were acquired when speed mattered more than invention. Entire capabilities appeared instantly instead of being developed over years. That difference can completely change the trajectory of a business. Building is slow leverage. Acquisition is instant leverage. But acquisition requires something founders don't usually have in the early stages: capital. Without capital, the only option is effort. Everything must be created manually. That constraint is part of what makes early entrepreneurship so demanding. Once capital enters the system, the equation changes. Now the founder has two resources to allocate: time and money. And the strategic question becomes much more interesting. Should the system spend time building this capability, or should it spend capital acquiring it? I remember evaluating an opportunity where the instinctive reaction was to start building. The idea was attractive, and building it internally felt natural. But when I looked closer at what the process would actually require, months of development, testing, integration, something became obvious. Someone else had already built a version of this. They had already spent the time. They had already absorbed the trial and error. That meant the system could access the capability immediately instead of gradually. And that changed the decision entirely. The real advantage of acquisition isn't ownership. It's speed. Speed matters more than many founders realize once a system begins operating at scale. Markets change. Opportunities appear unexpectedly. Competitors move quickly. When a business has to build every capability internally, the pace of expansion becomes limited by how fast the team can create new things. Acquisition removes that constraint. It allows the system to integrate capabilities that already exist instead of waiting years for them to emerge internally. But acquisition isn't automatically the right choice. There are situations where building is still the superior path. If the capability is deeply tied to the core identity of the business, building creates understanding that acquisition cannot replicate. If the system needs flexibility and control, building may produce a more adaptable result. And sometimes the act of building reveals insights that would never appear through ownership alone. The real skill lies in recognizing the difference. Strong founders learn to build what defines the system and acquire what accelerates it. That principle becomes clearer the longer a business operates. The core engine of the system, the thing that generates value and differentiates the business, is often worth building carefully. But the surrounding ecosystem can frequently be acquired. Tools, capabilities, entire complementary businesses. When capital is used strategically in this way, growth begins to look different. Instead of expanding only through effort, the system begins expanding through integration. I remember noticing that some of the businesses I admired most weren't growing by doing more work themselves. They were quietly absorbing pieces of the ecosystem around them. Each acquisition made the system slightly stronger, slightly faster, slightly more capable. Over time, those pieces formed something much larger than what the founders could have built alone. The businesses that scaled the furthest often stop building everything themselves. They start assembling systems. That's the moment when entrepreneurship begins to resemble architecture more than effort. The founder isn't simply creating new pieces anymore. They're deciding which pieces should exist inside the system and how those pieces should come together. Some will be built, some will be acquired, but all of them serve the same purpose: strengthening the machine so that the next stage of growth becomes possible.